Hi, in today's demo, we are going to look at hybrid environment automation with Ansible. As we know, it is still common to have both virtual machines and Kubernetes running in an enterprise. The virtual machines and Kubernetes clusters can be running on-prem, on top of virtualization platforms such as VMware, or be deployed in the public clouds. Hybrid clouds are also common for many large organizations. For instance, high-performing database may be running on dedicated hardware or virtual machines, while microservice applications run on top of the Kubernetes clusters. In this demo, we will look at how Ansible Automation Platform can be used in an hybrid environment. We will make use of Ansible to deploy EC2 instance in AWS, install, configure, and set up MySQL database on the EC2 instance, and deploy the Spring Boot application on Red Hat OpenShift. The high-level architectural diagram looks like this. So before going into the demo itself, let's just look at some of the content that we have. So the Spring Boot application itself are coming from this particular Git repository that is created and managed by Bright. Right, as you can see over here, it contains all the instructions on how to set up the Swagger Spring Boot application, right, as well as instructions on how to set up the MySQL databases, permissions, and the stuff that's needed in order for the database to operate properly. So what I'm going to do basically is to leverage on the content over here, convert them into Ansible automation and playbooks so that we will be able to use Ansible to set up the Spring Boot application on top of OpenShift, as well as to install and set up the required configurations of the MySQL database in the EC2 instance. All the relevant playbooks are inside this particular repository that is maintained by myself, right? So you can see that the relevant information as well as playbooks are stored over here. As part of the orchestration and automation, right, I'm also using the community.mysql collections that is available from the galaxy.ansible.com. Right, so basically we reuse whatever that is possible to reduce the time that's needed to perform the task. Right, anything that's related to the AWS automation, I'm leveraging on the version 2.0 Amazon AWS Ansible collection. Right, so that's what I'm doing over here. Some of the other stuff that I have inside includes things like the community.kubernetes. Right, so let's look at what we have in Amazon. Right, so in AWS, I have my Ansible Automation Platform running as a virtual machine. Right, so this is running the latest Ansible Automation Platform 2.0. You can see over here that this is how the dashboard looks like. You know, we still look at the projects that we will be using. Right, so we basically pointed to the Git repository that I was mentioning earlier. Right, the other stuff that we have, you know, for instance, the credentials, right? We have the credentials that allows me to access images in Quay, right? As well as in the Red Hat container registry, right? The EC2 instance, which is the Red Hat Enterprise Linux virtual machine that has been created, that or will be created AWS. And then I have the token barrier for me to access the OpenShift, right? And also credentials for me to be able to access and trigger the API call towards Amazon Web Services for me to spin up the virtual machine. Right, so quite a fair bit of stuff that we define over here. Right, inventory wise, I have a rel inventory. So what I'm doing over here is that I have a database node that will be the MySQL database that will be set up and deployed. So I'm gonna give it a fixed private IP because it sits in the same network as my Ansible Automation Platform VM. Right, so all these things will be set up, and we will attach it to the virtual machine that we will be creating. So in this way, we will have a definite value, right, that we will know that we can be using to SSH into. So some of the job templates over here, right, we can see that, you know, we have things like the create EC2 instance, installing the database, setting up the Spring Boot Swagger application on top of the Red Hat OpenShift, right? So one of those things that you may notice over here is the custom execution environment, right? That I have created over here, right? So this is something new, right? Within Ansible Automation Platform 2.0, we have the notion of execution environment, whereby you can create the environment that is needed in order to perform the automation. Right over here, it's pointing to the Quay.io, right, where I created a custom image, right. So if you want to have more information on this, you can actually come to this blog on how you can actually build the image itself, right? So just to give an idea on why you need to do this, because without doing this, kind of end up with errors like this, right? Whereby it's not able to access the OpenShift classes because it's missing the binaries that's needed in the libraries, right? So what I did was basically, you know, to ensure that the collections as well as all the relevant Python requirements being built into the image, and then what I did was to publish it inside the queue. So this is where Ansible Automation Platform is pulling the image and using that as my execution environment. So those are some of the groundworks that has to be done, right, in order to start this demo, right? So once you have done all those things, what needs to happen after that is to trigger the relevant playbook. So as you can see over here, I only have one running instance, and that's my automation platform VM, right? What I'm doing now is that I'm gonna run the template to create the EC2 instance. So I specify the key pair, right, to use for the instance. I specify the instance type. The AMI image itself basically is going to point to the Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8, right? So that's our AMI image. The security group that I have, right? Which region, right? I can have a drop down. It's up to me to select. Which subnet ID of the VPC, right? The instance name, right? I did mention earlier on that we'll be using this particular private IP address, right? And after which, you just have to hit launch. So what it does at this point in time is that it is going to spin up a container, right, that has the image that we have defined for the execution environment and perform the actual automation itself. It creates a ENI in Amazon Web Service, right? And after which it is going to create the virtual machine itself and attach this to the virtual machine, right? So that's what's going to happen. So you can see over here that it's deploying the virtual machine. If you hit refresh, you can see that the virtual machine has been given the name and that it is actually initializing, right? It's starting up. So you can see that the machine is almost up, right? It's just initializing, it's in a running state, everything looks good. Let's just go back and we can see that we have already finished running this playbook, as what we saw earlier. So then the next thing that we do is to deploy the database on it. I'm defining a few extra variables over here, right? The database name, the user, the password, etc. So basically, I'm going to leverage on the community.mysql collections that's available in Galaxy to do the deployment of the database. So this is going to take a while as it runs through all the steps that is needed in order to deploy the database. All right, it took about a minute to install the database. So now that the database is up, right, the next thing that we do, right, is to make sure that we run the deployment of the application, right, on top of OCP. So let's just check over here that we don't actually have a demo project. What Ansible is going to do is to set up the demo project as well as to set up to deploy the application inside the demo project itself, right? So over here, we know that the IP address is this. So the next thing that we do is we want to make sure that it is able to connect to our VM, right, which is actually a database. Right, so we define the namespace, right? We point to the image, right, that has been created, right? So Bright has already uploaded, so I'm just reusing it. We specify the DB password, username, and all those. This is for generating the configuration files that we will be using in OpenShift. We specify the route that we will be using as well. Right? So once everything is good, we just hit launch. So it's going to deploy the namespace and to deploy the application as well. So let's just go back to the projects. It's creating secrets and the deployment YAML itself. So we can see that this is created, right? We look at the workload. Right now, there's nothing yet. Okay. Right. So you can see deployment. Right. So let's look at the pods. You can see that it has come up, right? So let's just look at the routes. It has been created as well. So if you go back to Ansible Tower, right, everything has been created. It's all good, right? And then if you just open up the link, so you can see that the application is up, right? It's that simple. Let's just do a very simple check, right? If you do a get, you do execute, you actually manage to pull the information from the MySQL database that we have connected externally, right? So that is a VM running in AWS. And over here we have OpenShift. We have the application running on top that connects to the external database, and everything is working as expected. So it is actually very simple, right, to set up everything, be it on the OpenShift environment or on the external virtual machines, databases using Ansible. And this is the end of the demo. Thanks for watching.